The scent of aged parchment and freshly brewed coffee had once been the defining aromas of Clara's world, a world as predictable and contained as the library shelves she so meticulously curated. Her life was a study in quietude, a gentle, flowing river of routine that meandered through the days, never breaking its banks. She was a spectator to life's grand drama, content to read about adventures rather than live them. Her small apartment, her portly cat, Winston, and a cherished collection of antique teacups were the cornerstones of her simple, unassuming existence. She was ordinary, and in her ordinariness she found a strange sort of comfort, a shield against the unpredictable chaos of the world outside her window. She was blissfully unaware that a storm of unimaginable proportions was gathering just beyond the horizon of her perception, a storm that was about to make landfall in the heart of her quiet life. The day the storm hit began with the deceptive calm of any other autumn morning. The air, crisp and cool, carried the scent of wood smoke and decaying leaves. The university campus was a riot of colour, the trees ablaze in fiery reds and burnished golds. Clara was at her post, the circulation desk, the rhythmic beeping of the book scanner a familiar, soothing mantra. The ebb and flow of students was a predictable tide, their youthful faces a fleeting gallery of ambition and anxiety. And then he walked through the doors. He was a stark anomaly in the sea of fresh-faced students. He was older, his presence a magnetic force that seemed to bend the very air around him. He moved with a languid, predatory grace that was utterly out of place in the hallowed, hushed halls of the library. He was a tall, imposing figure, his broad shoulders testing the limits of his simple, dark jacket. His hair, the colour of a starless midnight sky, fell in soft, unruly waves around a face that was a breathtaking landscape of sharp angles and rugged, unapologetic masculinity. But it was his eyes that ensnared her, that pulled her under. They were the colour of a roiling, stormy sea, a turbulent, mesmerising grey that seemed to peel back the layers of her carefully constructed defences and gaze directly into the hidden corners of her soul. Their gazes locked across the cavernous expanse of the library, and in that single, heart-stopping instant, Clara's meticulously ordered world imploded. A bolt of pure, unadulterated agony ripped through her, a white-hot lance of pain that originated in the centre of her chest and exploded outwards, a supernova of torment that seared through every nerve, every muscle, every fibre of her being. A scream, raw and guttural and utterly alien, was torn from her throat. The books in her hands, forgotten, clattered to the floor, her body convulsing as a wave of vertigo and nausea threatened to drag her into a black, bottomless abyss. The man, his stormy grey eyes widening in a mixture of profound shock and dawning horrified recognition, started towards her, his movements a blur of impossible speed and desperate purpose. But Clara was already gone, lost in a tunnel of excruciating pain, her senses besieged by a tidal wave of new, incomprehensible information. The familiar, comforting scent of old paper and coffee was brutally replaced by a symphony of 1,000 new, intoxicating aromas. The damp, loamy earth outside the library walls, the subtle, floral perfume of a girl browse the poetry section 3 aisles away, the faint, metallic tang of fear that now permeated the air. Her hearing, once a dull, unremarkable sense was suddenly a razor's edge. Every rustle of a page, every whispered, panicked conversation, every distant, frantic footstep, a deafening, cacophonous roar in her ears. And her bones were on fire. They were shifting, grinding, reshaping themselves into a form that was horrifyingly, terrifyingly not her own. She collapsed to her knees, her body contorting in a grotesque, unnatural dance of agony. Her fingers, once long and slender and made for turning the delicate pages of ancient books, were now thick and calloused, her nails elongating, hardening into sharp, curved claws. Hair, thick and coarse and the colour of midnight, sprouted from her skin, a dark sable coat that covered her from head to toe. Her spine elongated with a series of sickening cracks, her jaw stretching, her teeth sharpening into a set of formidable, glistening fangs. The transformation was a symphony of torment, a brutal, violent crescendo that was tearing her apart from the inside out. She was no longer Clara, the quiet, unassuming librarian. She was a creature of primal, unreasoning instinct, a beast of untamed, terrified fury. She was a wolf. The last, fragile vestiges of her human consciousness were fading, consumed by a tidal wave of primal fear and overwhelming confusion. She was a prisoner in a body that was not her own, her mind a maelstrom of new, terrifying instincts that screamed at her to flee, to hide, to escape the suffocating confines of the library, the prying, terrified eyes of the students who were now screaming and scrambling for the exits in a stampede of panic. The man, the one with the stormy grey eyes, was there. He was standing before her, a solitary, unwavering figure in the swirling chaos. His handsome face, a mask of awe and a deep, gut-wrenching sorrow. He made no move to harm her, no gesture of aggression. He simply stood there, his presence a strange, calming anchor in the tempest of her new, terrifying reality. He said something, his voice a low, resonant rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards and into the very marrow of her newly formed bones. But she couldn't understand the words. Her human mind, with its capacity for language and reason, was gone, brutally replaced by the primal, unreasoning instincts of the wolf. And the wolf, in its boundless terror and overwhelming confusion, saw only a threat. With a snarl that was all tooth and fury, she lunged. Not at the man, but at the large plate-glass window that represented her only escape. The glass shattered on impact, the sound a deafening, concussive explosion in the sudden, ringing silence of the library. She landed on the soft, forgiving earth outside, her powerful new legs absorbing the shock of the fall with an ease that was both exhilarating and terrifying. And then she ran. She ran with a speed and an agility she had never known, her powerful muscles propelling her through the manicured, orderly lawns of the campus and into the dense, welcoming, chaotic darkness of the nearby woods. She ran from the pain, from the confusion, from the man with the stormy grey eyes who had, with a single, devastating glance, shattered her world into a million irreparable pieces. She ran from the impossible, terrifying, undeniable truth that she, Clara, the ordinary, unassuming librarian, was a monster, and she had no idea why. The forest was a sanctuary, a haven of primal darkness that seemed to welcome the newly awakened, terrified beast within her. The world, which had once been a familiar, predictable, and somewhat boring place, was now a kaleidoscope of new sensations, a symphony of sights, sounds, and smells that was both intoxicatingly beautiful, overwhelmingly terrifying. Clara, or what was left of her, was a prisoner in her own body, a terrified spectator watching the world unfold through the eyes of a wolf. She ran until her newly formed lungs burned, and her powerful muscles ached with a deep, searing fire, the adrenaline of the transformation slowly, inexorably giving way to a bone-deep, soul-crushing exhaustion. She found a small, secluded den beneath the gnarled, twisted roots of an ancient oak tree, a dark, earthy space that offered a semblance of safety in the unfamiliar, terrifying, and yet strangely welcoming wilderness. She collapsed onto the damp, cool earth, her body trembling with a violent, uncontrollable mixture of fear and a strange, primal sense of belonging. As the long, terrifying hours passed, the primal, unreasoning instincts of the wolf began to recede, and fragments of her human consciousness, like shattered pieces of a mirror, started to seep back into her awareness. Memories of her life, of the library, of the man with the stormy grey eyes, flickered through her mind like a broken, silent film. But they were distant, disconnected, like memories of a life that belonged to someone else entirely. The searing, mind-numbing pain of the transformation had subsided, but it was replaced by a new, more insidious kind of agony, the agony of profound, soul-shattering confusion, of a shattered, unrecognizable identity. Who was she? Was she Clara, the quiet, unassuming librarian? Or was she this creature, this wolf with its sharp, glistening teeth and its primal, unreasoning instincts? The two identities were at war within her, a brutal, bloody battle for control of a mind that was no longer her own. As the first, faint fingers of dawn began to paint the eastern sky in shades of pale, ethereal rose and soft, muted lavender, a new sensation began to creep into her awareness. A pull, a subtle, yet undeniable, magnetic force that was drawing her out of the den, back towards the world of concrete and order that she had so desperately fled. It was a persistent, irresistible urge, a homing beacon that was calling to a part of her she didn't know existed, a part of her that was both terrifying and strangely comforting. She fought it, the human part of her, the part that still clung to the shattered remnants of her old, predictable life, screaming in silent, desperate protest. She wanted to stay hidden, to curl up in the cool, comforting darkness of the den, and never come out, to simply cease to exist. But the pull was too strong, the instinct too powerful to deny. With a soft, plaintive whimper of resignation, she crawled out of the den and into the pale, ethereal morning light. The world was a different place now, seen through the hyper-aware, hypersensitive eyes of a wolf. The colours were more vibrant, more saturated, the smells more intoxicating, more complex, the sounds more layered, more nuanced. She could smell the sweet, clean scent of the dew on the grass, the musky, earthy scent of a rabbit that had passed by hours before, the faint, tantalizingly familiar aroma of coffee brewing in a distant, unseen kitchen. And she could smell him. He was close. The man with the stormy grey eyes. His scent was a complex, intoxicating, and utterly unique blend of pine and damp earth and something else, something uniquely, undeniably his. It was a scent that both terrified and intrigued her in equal measure, a scent that was inextricably, eternally linked to the cataclysmic, world-shattering event that had so brutally and irrevocably shattered her life. She followed the scent, her movements cautious, her senses on high alert, every fibre of her being humming with a strange, nervous energy. She moved through the woods with a preternatural stealth she had never known, her paws making no sound on the damp, forgiving earth. She was a shadow, a ghost, in the swirling, morning mist. She found him at the edge of the woods, where the wild, untamed chaos of the forest gave way to the manicured, orderly lawns of the campus. He was standing with his back to her, a solitary, imposing figure, his gaze fixed on the shattered, gaping maw of the library window. His broad shoulders were slumped in a posture of weary, heart-wrenching resignation. As she watched him, a new wave of emotions that were not her own, washed over her. She felt his profound, soul-deep loneliness, his overwhelming, crushing sorrow, his deep, gut-wrenching, and utterly inexplicable sense of guilt. It was as if she could feel what he was feeling, as if their emotions were somehow, impossibly, intertwined. He turned then, as if sensing her presence, his movements fluid and graceful, and his stormy grey eyes met hers. The jolt was not one of pain this time, but of a deep, soul-shattering recognition. A recognition that went beyond memory, beyond logic, beyond reason. It was a feeling of coming home, of finding a missing piece of herself that she had never known was lost, a piece that made her, for the first time in her life, feel truly whole. He took a slow, deliberate step towards her, his hands outstretched in a gesture of peace, of supplication. "Clara," he said, his voice a low, gentle, resonant rumble that sent a shiver of pure, unadulterated pleasure down her spine. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." The wolf within her snarled, a low, guttural sound of warning, its primal instincts screaming at her to run, to fight, to protect herself from this unknown, and therefore dangerous, threat. But the human part of her, the part that was still clinging desperately to the shattered remnants of her old life, was drawn to him, to the undeniable kindness in his eyes, to the gentle, soothing reassurance in his voice. He took another step, and another, until he was standing just a few feet away. He knelt down, bringing himself to her level, his stormy grey eyes, a swirling vortex of sorrow and hope, never leaving hers. "I know you're scared," he said, his voice soft and soothing, a gentle melody that calmed the frantic, terrified beating of her heart. "I know you're confused, but I can explain everything. I can help you." He reached out a hand, his fingers long and calloused, and gently, reverently, stroked the top of her head. The touch was electric, sending a jolt of pure, unadulterated pleasure through her that was as intense and as overwhelming as the pain of the transformation had been. The wolf within her, which had been a raging, snarling inferno of fear and aggression, suddenly stilled, soothed by his touch, by the undeniable, soul-deep rightness of his presence. "You're not a monster, Clara," he said, his voice thick with a raw, powerful emotion. "You're a werewolf, just like me." The words hung in the air between them, a bombshell of a revelation that should have sent her running for the hills, screaming in terror. But it didn't. Instead, it brought a strange, unexpected, and utterly profound sense of relief. She wasn't a monster. She wasn't a freak of nature. She was something else, something more. She was a werewolf. "And I'm your mate," he added, his voice dropping to a near whisper, a soft, intimate caress of sound. "The other half of your soul." Mate. The word resonated within her, a deep primal chord that vibrated through every cell in her newly formed body. It was a word she had read countless times in her fantasy novels, a concept she had always dismissed as pure, unadulterated fiction. But now, in this new, impossible, and terrifying reality, it felt right. It felt true. The man, her mate, whose name she still didn't know, continued to stroke her fur, his touch a gentle grounding force in the swirling, chaotic vortex of her mind. "I know this is a lot to take in," he said, a faint, sad, and yet undeniably beautiful smile playing on his lips. "But you're not alone in this, Clara. I'm here for you. I'll always be here for you." He stood up and held out his hand, a silent, powerful invitation. "Come with me," he said, his voice a gentle, irresistible command. "Let me take you somewhere safe. Let me help you understand." The wolf within her was no longer fighting, no longer afraid. It was drawn to him, to the safety and the promise of answers that he represented. And the human part of her, the part that was so incredibly tired of being scared and confused and alone, was ready, finally, to trust him. With a sense of fatalistic, yet strangely hopeful resignation, she took a hesitant step forward and then another until she was standing at his side. He didn't try to leash her, didn't try to control her. He simply walked beside her, his presence a silent, comforting, and unwavering promise. As they walked away from the shattered, glittering remnants of her old life and towards an unknown, uncertain, and undoubtedly dangerous future, Clara, the newly awakened werewolf, knew one thing for certain: her life would never be the same. The quiet, predictable, and ultimately unfulfilling world she had known was gone forever, brutally and irrevocably replaced by a world of magic and monsters, of mates and destiny. And it had all started with him, the man with the stormy grey eyes, the man who was her mate. The man who had, with a single, devastating, and ultimately fated glance, unleashed the wolf within. The man who introduced himself as Reese led her away from the manicured lawns of the university and into the deeper, more ancient heart of the woods, a part she had never dared to explore. The trees here were older, their branches gnarled and twisted into fantastical shapes, their leaves a thick, impenetrable canopy that blocked out the morning sun, casting the forest floor in a perpetual, dappled twilight. The air was cooler here, the smells more primal, more earthy, the sounds more muted, more mysterious. It was a world that was both breathtakingly beautiful and vaguely intimidating, a world that was now, impossibly, her own. They walked in a comfortable silence for what felt like hours, the only sound the soft, rhythmic padding of her paws on the damp, forgiving earth, and the steady, reassuring crunch of Reese's boots on the thick carpet of fallen leaves. Clara's mind was a whirlwind of unanswered questions, a maelstrom of fear, confusion, and a strange, burgeoning excitement. Werewolf? Mate? It was all too much, too impossible to comprehend on a rational level. And yet, with every step she took at Rhys's side, a strange, profound sense of calm began to settle over her, a quiet reassurance that emanated from the very core of her being. The bond between them, the nascent, tentative stirring of the mate bond, was a tangible thing, a warm, comforting presence that soothed the ragged, frayed edges of her fear. They came to a small, secluded cabin, nestled in a sun-dappled clearing by a fast-flowing, crystal-clear stream. It was a rustic, charming place, its walls made of rough-hewn logs, its roof a patchwork of moss-covered slate. A thin, lazy plume of smoke curled from its stone chimney, a welcoming beacon against the backdrop of the ancient, silent forest. Rhys led her to the door and opened it, a silent, graceful gesture of invitation. Clara hesitated for a moment, the wolf within her, still wary and untrusting, balking at the thought of enclosed spaces, of the unknown. But the pull of the bond, the trust she was beginning to feel for this handsome, mysterious stranger who was her mate, was stronger than her fear. She stepped over the threshold and into the surprising warmth and comfort of the cabin. The interior was simple but comfortable, a single, large room with a massive, fieldstone fireplace, a comfortable-looking, well-worn leather armchair, and a small, functional kitchen. It was the home of a man who lived a solitary life, a man who was at one with the wild, untamed wilderness that surrounded him. Rhys motioned for her to lie down on the plush, sheepskin rug in front of the fireplace, and she obeyed without question, her body suddenly heavy with an exhaustion that went beyond the physical. The warmth of the fire was a welcome, comforting caress against her chilled skin, its dancing, mesmerizing flames a soothing, calming sight. Rhys disappeared into the kitchen and returned a few moments later with a large ceramic bowl of cool, fresh water, which he placed on the floor beside her. She drank greedily, her throat parched from her long, frantic, and terrifying run. As she drank, Rhys sat down in the armchair, his stormy grey eyes, a swirling vortex of emotions, never leaving her. "I know you have questions," he said, his voice a low, gentle rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. "Ask them. I'll answer them as best I can." Clara looked up at him, her own eyes, which she now realized were a startling, luminous, golden colour, filled with 1,000 unspoken, unformed questions. But she couldn't speak. Not yet. The transformation had been too recent, the shift in her reality too profound, too seismic. The words were trapped in her throat, a tangled, chaotic jumble of fear, confusion, and a strange, exhilarating wonder. Rhys, it seemed, understood. He didn't press her, he simply sat there, his presence a silent, patient, unwavering anchor in the swirling, emotional storm of her mind. He began to speak, his voice a low, soothing melody that washed over her, calming the frantic, terrified beating of her heart. He told her about their kind, about the werewolves who lived hidden in the shadows of the human world, their existence a carefully guarded secret. He told her about the packs, about the alphas, about the intricate and often brutal social structure that governed their lives. He told her about the mate bond, the sacred, unbreakable, and often tumultuous connection that bound two souls together for eternity. "It's a rare thing, the mate bond," he said, his voice filled with a quiet, profound reverence. a gift from the moon goddess, a blessing and a curse. It's the reason you shifted, Clara. The sight of your true mate, the recognition of your other half, was the catalyst, the spark that ignited the wolf that has been lying dormant within you for your entire life. Clara listened, her mind slowly, painstakingly, beginning to process the impossible, undeniable truth of his words. She was a werewolf. She had been born a werewolf, her wolf a sleeping giant within her, waiting for the one thing, the one person that could awaken it, her mate. But my parents, she thought, the words a jumble of painful confusion in her mind. They were human. I'm sure of it. Rhys, as if sensing her unspoken, agonizing question, nodded his head. It's possible, he said, his voice gentle, his gaze soft with compassion. Sometimes the gene lies dormant for generations, a sleeping dragon waiting for the right moment to awaken, only to be triggered by a powerful, once-in-a-lifetime catalyst. Like the mate bond. Or it's possible that you were adopted. The idea was a new, unexpected, and devastating blow. Another gaping crack in the already shattered, crumbling foundation of her identity. Adopted. Could it be true? She thought of her parents, of their loving, gentle, and utterly normal, human lives. They had never given her any reason to suspect that she wasn't their own flesh and blood. But then again, what did she really know about them? They had died when she was young, their lives a collection of faded, sepia-toned photographs and half-remembered, whispered stories. I don't know, Rhys admitted, a look of profound, heart-wrenching sadness in his stormy grey eyes. But we can find out. I promise you, we will find out. Together. He continued to speak, his words a gentle, steady stream of information that began to fill in the gaping, terrifying holes in her understanding of herself and her new world. He told her about the shift, about the excruciating pain and the overwhelming confusion, about the intoxicating, terrifying power of the primal instincts. He told her that with time, with practice, with patience, she would learn to control it, to shift at will, to integrate the two, warring halves of her being into a single, unified and powerful whole. You're not a monster, Clara, he said again, his voice firm, his gaze unwavering, his words a soothing balm to her raw, wounded soul. You are something more. You are both human and wolf, and that is a powerful, beautiful, and incredibly rare thing. As he spoke, a strange, unexpected sense of peace began to settle over her, a quiet, fragile sense of acceptance. The fear was still there, a cold, hard, unyielding knot in the pit of her stomach. But it was no longer all-consuming. It was tempered by a new, fragile, and yet surprisingly resilient sense of hope. Hope for a future, hope for understanding, hope for a life that was more than just the quiet, predictable, and ultimately unfulfilling existence she had once known. As the day wore on, the bone-deep, soul-crushing exhaustion of the transformation began to catch up with her. Her eyelids grew heavy, her body ached with a deep, pervasive fatigue that was unlike anything she had ever experienced before. Rhys, seeing her struggle, stood up and gently, effortlessly, scooped her into his arms. She was surprisingly light in her wolf form, her body a warm, furry, and strangely comforting weight against his broad, powerful chest. He carried her to a small, adjoining bedroom and laid her down on a soft, comfortable bed that smelled faintly of him, of pine and damp earth. He pulled a thick woolen blanket over her, his touch gentle, reverent, and surprisingly tender. "Rest now, Clara," he whispered, his voice a soft, soothing lullaby that caressed her ears. "You're safe here. I'll be right outside." He turned to leave, but she let out a small whimper of protest, the sound, a soft, plaintive, and utterly involuntary cry in the stillness of the room. The thought of being alone, of being separated from him, from the comforting, grounding presence of her mate, was suddenly, inexplicably, unbearable. He turned back, a look of profound, heart-wrenching understanding in his stormy grey eyes. He sat down on the edge of the bed and took her paw in his hand, his thumb stroking the soft, sable fur. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, his voice a low, reassuring rumble that vibrated through her very soul. "I'll stay right here. I promise." And as she drifted off to sleep, her hand, her paw, held securely in his, the warmth of his presence, a comforting, impenetrable shield against the encroaching darkness, Clara, for the first time since her world had so brutally and irrevocably shattered, felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a very, very long time. A sense of belonging. She was a werewolf. She was a mate. And she was, finally, impossibly, home. Clara slept for what felt like an eternity, her dreams a chaotic, surreal jumble of fragmented memories and raw, primal instincts. She dreamt of running through the endless, moonlit forest, the wind a wild, exhilarating song in her fur, the scent of the damp, loamy earth a symphony in her nostrils. She dreamt of the library, of the sickening sound of shattering glass, of the raw, naked terror in the eyes of the students. She dreamt of her parents, their faces fading in and out of focus like old sepia-toned photographs, their voices a distant, half-remembered, and now heart-wrenchingly poignant melody. And through it all, she dreamt of him, of Rhys, of his stormy grey eyes, a swirling vortex of sorrow and hope, of his gentle, calloused touch, a soothing balm to her raw, wounded soul, of the deep, resonant rumble of his voice, a steady, unwavering anchor in the maelstrom of her subconscious. He was a constant, comforting presence in her dreams, a steady, unwavering beacon of light in the swirling, emotional darkness. She awoke to the familiar, comforting, and quintessentially human smell of bacon and coffee, the aromas a stark, jarring contrast to the primal, earthy scents of the forest that had so completely filled her dreams. She was no longer a wolf. She was human again, her body her own, her mind, for the most part, her own. The transformation back had been as seamless, as unconscious, and as natural as the process of waking from a deep, dreamless sleep. She sat up, her body aching and stiff, a dull, throbbing protest in every muscle, but her mind, surprisingly, blessedly clear. The memories of the past day, as fantastical and as unbelievable as they were not a dream. They were real. She was a werewolf, and Rhys, the handsome, mysterious man who was currently humming a soft, tuneless, and surprisingly pleasant melody in the adjoining kitchen, was her mate. She swung her legs over the side of the bed and looked down at herself. She was wearing a large, soft, and ridiculously comfortable t-shirt that she vaguely recognized as Rhys's, her own clothes, which had been torn to shreds during the violent, agonizing transformation, nowhere to be seen. Her body, which had always been slender, unassuming, and, if she was being honest with herself, a little bit frail, now felt a different, stronger, more alive, more potent. She stood up and walked to the small, cracked, and slightly warped mirror that hung on the wall. The face that stared back at her was her own, but it was also not her own. Her eyes, which had once been a soft, unremarkable, and somewhat mousy brown, were now a startling, luminous, and utterly captivating golden colour, the colour of a wolf's eyes in the moonlight. There were new, subtle, and yet undeniable changes to her features. A certain wildness, a certain untamed, unapologetic beauty that had not been there before. She was Clara, but she was also something more, and something less. She walked out of the bedroom and into the main room of the cabin. Rhys was at the stove, his back to her, his broad, powerful shoulders moving with a practiced, easy grace as he cooked. He turned as he heard her approach, a warm, welcoming, and utterly devastating smile spreading across his handsome face. "Good morning, sleepyhead," he said, his voice a low, gentle, and incredibly sexy rumble. "I was beginning to wonder if you were going to sleep the day away." He gestured to the small, rustic wooden table that was set for two. "I made breakfast," he said, his smile widening, revealing a set of perfect white teeth. "I wasn't sure what you liked, so I made a bit of everything." Clara sat down at the table, her stomach rumbling with a ferocious primal hunger that was far more intense, more demanding, than anything she had ever experienced before. Rhys placed a heaping plate of bacon, eggs, and toast in front of her, and she dug in with an appetite that was almost wolfish. They ate in a comfortable, easy silence, the only sound the crackle of the fire in the hearth, and the soft, rhythmic clinking of their forks against their plates. Clara, who had always been a quiet, introverted, and somewhat socially awkward person, found but she didn't feel the need to fill the silence with idle, meaningless chatter. Being with Rhys felt natural, easy, as if they had known each other for a lifetime, as if they were two halves of the same, perfectly imperfect whole. After they had finished, Rhys cleared the plates and sat back down opposite her, his stormy grey eyes, a swirling vortex of emotions she was only just beginning to learn how to read, studying her with a gentle, unnerving intensity. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice soft with a genuine, palpable concern. I don't know," she admitted, her own voice a little raspy, a little uncertain. Confused, scared, but also okay. She looked at him, a silent, desperate question in her luminous, golden eyes. Is this real? Any of it?" Rhys reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb stroking the back of it with a gentle, reassuring tenderness. "It's real, Clara," he said, his voice firm but gentle, a solid, unwavering anchor in the swirling, chaotic sea of her uncertainty. All of it. He spent the rest of the morning patiently, painstakingly answering her questions, his patience, it seemed, as vast and as endless as the forest that surrounded them. He told her about his own life, about his pack, the Blackwood pack, which was located deep in the heart of the national forest that bordered the university town. He told her that he was the beta of the pack, the second in command to the alpha, a position of great power and even greater responsibility. "I was in town on pack business," he explained, his voice a low, serious rumble. "When I scented you, I didn't know what it was at first. Just a strange, compelling, and utterly intoxicating scent that was drawing me in, pulling me towards you. Then I saw you, and the mate bond, hit me like a physical blow, like a bolt of lightning to the chest. I knew in that single, heart-stopping instant that you were my mate." He told her about the challenges she would face, about the inherent difficulties of living a dual life, of balancing the mundane, predictable, and often tedious human world with the wild, untamed, and often dangerous werewolf world. He told her that she had a choice to make, a choice that would define the rest of her life. She could try to return to her old life, to the quiet, predictable, and ultimately unfulfilling world of the library, to pretend that the transformation, that he, had never happened, or she could embrace her new reality, her new identity, and join him in the wild, untamed, and often brutal world of the werewolves. "I won't force you to do anything you don't want to do, Clara," he said, his voice sincere, his gaze unwavering, his hand still holding hers in a gentle, possessive grip. "The choice is yours, and yours alone, but I hope you'll choose to stay with me." The thought of returning to her old life, to the quiet, predictable, and now suffocatingly small world of the library, was both tempting and terrifying in equal measure. It was a safe, familiar world, a world where she knew the rules, where she knew her place. But it was also a world that now felt small, insignificant, a world that was no longer, and perhaps never had been, her own. She looked at Rhys, at his strong, handsome, and impossibly beautiful face, at the raw, naked love, and the fierce, unwavering hope that shone in his stormy grey eyes. And she knew, with a certainty that came from the very depths of her soul, from the newly awakened wolf that now resided within her, that her choice had already been made. It had been made the moment their eyes had met across the cavernous expanse of the library. "I'll stay," she said, her voice clear and strong, her gaze unwavering, her heart, for the first time in her life, truly, completely, and irrevocably her own. "I'll stay with you." A slow, brilliant, and utterly devastating smile spread across Rhys's face, a smile that reached his eyes and made them shine with a brilliant silver light. It was a smile that promised a new beginning, a new life, a new and undoubtedly dangerous adventure. The days that followed were a whirlwind, a crash course in all things werewolf. Rhys was a patient, knowledgeable, and surprisingly gentle teacher, his lessons a fascinating and often terrifying mixture of practical instruction and ancient arcane lore. He taught her how to control the shift, how to call upon the wolf within her at will, how to ride the wave of the transformation rather than be consumed by it. He taught her how to hunt, how to track, how to use her newly heightened and often overwhelming senses to her advantage. He taught her about the history of their kind, about the legends and the myths, about the sacred and often brutal laws that governed their hidden, secret world. Clara, to her own surprise, was a quick study. Her mind, which had once been filled with the stories of others, now eagerly, ravenously, absorbing the story of her own kind. She discovered a strength, a resilience, and a fierce, unapologetic power she had never known she possessed. She was no longer Clara, the quiet, unassuming librarian. She was Clara, the werewolf, a creature of power and grace, of instinct and intellect, of two worlds, and yet, somehow, of neither. But it was in the quiet, stolen moments, in the spaces between the lessons, that their bond, their love, truly blossomed. It was in the shared laughter over a burnt and, ultimately, inedible meal. The comfortable, easy silence as they sat by the fire, their bodies tired and sore from a long day of training. The gentle, tender, and often breathtakingly passionate, stolen kisses in the pale, ethereal morning light. They were two halves of a whole, their souls entwined in a dance as old as time itself. And with each passing day, the bond grew stronger, a radiant, unbreakable, and utterly intoxicating thread that connected them, mind, body, and soul. One evening, as the sun began to set, painting the western sky in breathtaking shades of fiery orange and deep, bruised purple, Reese took her to a high, rocky outcrop that overlooked the vast, untamed expanse of the forest. "There's something I need to tell you, Clara," he said, his voice serious, his expression uncharacteristically and unnervingly grim. "What is it?" she asked, a flicker of cold, sharp unease stirring within her. "It's about your parents," he said, his voice low, his gaze fixed on the darkening horizon. "I've been doing some investigating. I had some of my pack members, the ones with the right skills, look into their past, into the circumstances of their death." Clara's breath caught in her throat. "And?" she prompted, her heart pounding a frantic, terrified rhythm against her ribs. "They weren't your biological parents, Clara," he confirmed, his voice gentle but firm, his words a physical blow that left her reeling. "You were adopted, and the couple who raised you, the couple you called Mom and Dad, they weren't just ordinary humans. They were members of a secret society, a group of werewolf hunters." The words were a physical blow, a punch to the gut that left her reeling, gasping for air. Hunters? Her parents? The loving, gentle couple from her faded, sepia-toned memories? It was impossible. Unthinkable. A lie. "But why?" she stammered, her mind struggling and failing to process the new, horrifying, and utterly devastating revelation. "Why would they adopt me?" "A werewolf?" "They didn't know," Reese explained, his voice heavy with a grim, world-weary understanding. "They didn't know what you were. They were part of a more moderate, and now extinct, faction of the society. They believed in protecting humans from rogue werewolves, the ones who had lost control, but they didn't believe in indiscriminately killing our kind. They found you as a baby, abandoned in the woods, wrapped in a silver blanket. They thought you were a human child, a victim of a rogue attack. They took you in, raised you as their own, and kept you hidden from the more radical, more dangerous elements of their society." "And their death?" Clara asked, her voice barely a whisper. a fragile, broken thing. It wasn't an accident, was it? Rhys shook his head, a look of profound, heart-wrenching sadness in his stormy grey eyes. No, he said, his voice low, his words a death knell to her childhood innocence. It wasn't. The radical faction of the Hunters, a group known as the Argentum Order, found out about you. They saw you as an abomination, a werewolf raised by humans, the perversion of the natural order. They saw your parents as traitors. They killed them, made it look like a car accident, and they intended to kill you too. That you were saved by a rogue wolf. The irony, the bitter, cruel irony, was not lost on Clara. The same kind of creature that had, in a sense, created her, the same kind of creature the Argentum Order so despised, had also been her saviour. A rogue wolf? She repeated, her voice filled with a mixture of confusion, disbelief, and a dawning, horrified understanding. Yes, Rhys said, his jaw tightening, a muscle twitching in his cheek. A rogue wolf who, it seems, has been watching over you, protecting you from the shadows, for your entire life. He paused, his gaze fixed on the darkening, and now menacing, horizon. We don't know who he is, or why he's taken such an interest in you. But he's out there, Clara. And so are the Hunters, the Argentum Order. They never stopped looking for you. And now that you've shifted, now that your scent is on the wind for any supernatural creature to find, they'll be coming for you. The news was a chilling, terrifying, and world-altering revelation, a dark, menacing cloud on the horizon of her new, sun-drenched, and yet incredibly fragile world. She was not just a werewolf. She was a target, a pawn in a deadly, ancient game with no easy way out. But as she looked at Rhys, at his strong, determined, and impossibly handsome face, at the fierce, protective, and unconditional love that shone in his stormy grey eyes, she knew that she was not alone. She had her mate by her side, her pack, his pack, at her back, and together they would face whatever storms, whatever monsters lay ahead. Quiet, predictable, and ultimately unfulfilling life of Clara, the librarian, was well and truly over, and the life of Clara, the werewolf, the hunted, the beloved, had just begun. The revelation that she had been hunted since he had been hunted. Infancy. A pawn in a deadly game she hadn't even known she was playing, cast a long, dark, and menacing shadow over Clara's newfound and still fragile happiness. The Argentum Order, the name itself, with its cold, metallic ring, sent a shiver of icy, primal dread down her spine. They were a faceless, nameless, and utterly terrifying threat. A boogeyman from a past she couldn't remember, and they were coming for her. The knowledge was a constant, low-level hum of anxiety beneath the surface of her daily life, a persistent, unwelcome reminder that her new world, for all its breathtaking beauty and intoxicating wonder, was also fraught with a danger that was as real and as deadly as the fangs of a rogue wolf. Rhys, ever the protector, the unwavering rock in the swirling, chaotic sea of her fear, was her anchor. He intensified her training, his lessons, which had once been a source of wonder and discovery, now taking on a new, grim urgency. He taught her not just how to hunt, how to survive, but how to fight. He taught her how to use her wolf's preternatural agility and strength, her human's sharp, analytical intellect and cunning, to her advantage. He taught her, in short, how to be a warrior. The best defense is a good offense, he would say, his voice a low, serious rumble, as they sparred in the sun-dappled clearing by the cabin, their bodies a blur of motion, a dance of predator and prey. You can't run from them forever. Clara, sooner or later, you'll have to stand and fight. Clara, to her own surprise, and to Reese's quiet, proud satisfaction, found that she had a natural, almost instinctual aptitude for combat. The years she had spent observing, watching, a silent, unnoticed spectator to the lives of others, had given her a keen, analytical eye for detail, an uncanny ability to anticipate her opponent's moves. She was fast, agile, and surprisingly, deceptively strong. The wolf within her was a fierce, formidable, and utterly unapologetic warrior, and the human within her was a clever, strategic, and surprisingly ruthless thinker. Together, they were a force to be reckoned with. But the training was not just about physical strength, about learning how to kill. It was also about mental fortitude, about learning how to survive. Reese taught her how to control her fear, how to channel its raw, potent energy into a cold, focused, and utterly lethal anger. He taught her how to shield her thoughts, to build impenetrable walls around her mind, to protect her most vulnerable self from the prying, insidious eyes of those who would seek to harm her. The Argentum Order is not just a group of mindless, bloodthirsty brutes, he warned her, his stormy grey eyes dark with a grim, world-weary seriousness. They are clever, cunning, and they have their own resources, their own dark magic. They have seers, mystics, wolves who have turned traitor, who have betrayed their own kind, and now use their abilities to hunt us, to kill us. The thought of werewolves hunting their own, of betraying the sacred, unbreakable bonds of pack and kin, was a sickening, terrifying, and utterly incomprehensible concept to Clara. Why? She asked, her voice filled with a horrified, naive disbelief. Why would they do that? Power, Reese said, his voice laced with a bitter, world-weary cynicism. Greed. Fear. Some wolves are just broken. They see the hunters as the winning side, and they'll do anything, betray anyone, to be a part of it. The news was a stark, brutal reminder that the world, her new world, was not as black and white, as good and evil, as she had once believed, as the books she had once so loved had led her to believe. There were shades of grey, endless, shifting shades of grey, complexities and betrayals that she was only just beginning to comprehend. As the days turned into weeks, a blur of sweat, pain, and a strange, exhilarating sense of empowerment, Clara's skills as a warrior grew, as did her confidence. The fear was still there, a constant, low-level hum in the background of her life, but it was no longer a crippling, all-consuming force. It was a whetstone, a sharpener, a tool that she could use to her advantage, a weapon in her growing arsenal. The bond with Reese was her anchor, her sanctuary, her greatest and most potent source of strength. Their love was a fierce, passionate, and all-consuming thing, a beacon of light in the encroaching and often overwhelming darkness. They were more than just mates, more than just lovers. They were partners, equals, two souls united in a desperate, and yet strangely hopeful, battle for their very survival. One evening, as they sat by the fire, their bodies tired and sore and pleasantly aching from a long day of training. Reese turned to her, his expression serious, his stormy grey eyes holding a new and slightly unnerving intensity. "It's time, Clara," he said, his voice low, his words sending a jolt of nervous excitement through her. "It's time for you to meet the pack." Clara's heart skipped a beat. The pack. The Blackwood pack. She had heard so much about them. About their strength, their loyalty, their fierce, unwavering devotion to their alpha, to each other. But the thought of meeting them, of being judged by them, of being seen as an outsider, a freak, was a daunting, terrifying prospect. "What if they don't like me?" she asked, her voice a small, hesitant, and embarrassingly childish whisper. Reese chuckled, a low, rumbling, and incredibly sexy sound that seemed to come from deep within his chest. "They'll love you," he said, his voice filled with a quiet, unwavering confidence. "You're my mate. You're one of them now, whether you like it or not." The next day, they journeyed to the heart of the Blackwood territory, a hidden, secluded, and breathtakingly beautiful valley that was home to the pack's main settlement. It was a bustling, vibrant community, a village of rustic, charming log cabins and sturdy, formidable stone houses nestled in the shadow of a towering, snow-capped mountain. Wolves of all ages were everywhere, their laughter and their voices, a symphony of life and vitality, filling the crisp, clean mountain air. Reese led her to the largest of the cabins, a long, low, and impressive building that served as the pack's great hall. As they approached, the massive oaken doors swung open, and a tall, imposing figure emerged. He was older than Reese, with silver-streaked hair and eyes the colour of a clear, winter sky. He radiated an aura of quiet, confident power, an authority that was both intimidating and strangely, unexpectedly comforting. This was the Alpha. "Reese," the Alpha said, his voice a deep, resonant bass that seemed to vibrate through the very ground beneath their feet. He clapped Reese on the shoulder in a gesture of warm, brotherly affection. Then, his gaze, as sharp and as clear as a shard of ice, fell on Clara, and his eyes, which had been warm and friendly, narrowed slightly, his expression becoming one of keen, assessing, and slightly unnerving scrutiny. "So," the Alpha said, his voice a low rumbling sound that seemed to vibrate through the very air around them. "This is her, the human." Clara's heart sank. The human. The word was a label, a brand, a stark, brutal reminder that she was an outsider, a freak, a creature of two worlds who belonged to neither. But then, the Alpha's stern, intimidating expression softened, and a slow, warm, and utterly genuine smile spread across his handsome, weathered face. "Welcome to the Blackwood pack, Clara," he said, his voice filled with a genuine, palpable warmth. "My name is Elias, and it is an honor and a privilege to finally meet the mate of my second." The relief that flooded through Clara was so intense, so overwhelming, that it almost brought her to her knees. He didn't hate her. He didn't see her as an outsider, a threat. He saw her as one of them. The rest of the pack followed their Alpha's lead, their initial, understandable curiosity and suspicion quickly, and thankfully giving way to a warm, welcoming, and utterly overwhelming acceptance. They were a diverse, boisterous, and fiercely loyal group, their personalities as varied and as vibrant as their fur colours. There was Anya, the feisty, red-headed warrior who was the pack's weapons master, her tongue as sharp as the blades she so expertly wielded. There was Ben, the gentle giant who was the pack's healer, his hands, as large as dinner plates, possessing a surprisingly gentle, healing touch. There was old, wise Elara, the pack's seer, her eyes, which were clouded with age and the weight of 1,000 visions, seeming to see right through to the very depths of Clara's soul. They welcomed her with open arms, with shared meals and stories and laughter. For the first time in her lonely, solitary life, Clara felt like she truly belonged. She was no longer an island, a solitary observer to the lives of others. She was part of a family, a pack. But even in the warmth, the safety, and the unconditional acceptance of the pack, the shadow of the Argentum Order, a dark, menacing cloud on the horizon, loomed large. A few days after her arrival, Elara, the seer, sought her out. The old she-wolf's face was grim, her clouded eyes filled with a dark, ominous, and terrifying premonition. "They are coming," she said, her voice a low, raspy, and chilling whisper. "The hunters, they have found you." The news was a jolt of icy, paralyzing fear, a stark, brutal reminder that their peaceful, idyllic existence was about to be shattered. "When?" Clara asked, her voice tight with a mixture of fear and a dawning, grim resolve. "Soon," Elara said, her gaze fixed on a point in the distance, as if she could see the future, their future, unfolding before her very eyes. "And they are not alone. They have a weapon, a new weapon, something I have never seen before, something that is an abomination to our kind, a perversion of nature itself." The seer's words were a chilling, ominous prophecy, a harbinger of the storm that was about to break. The Argentum Order was coming, and they were bringing with them a new, unknown, and utterly terrifying terror. The time for training, for preparation, was over. The time for fighting, for surviving, had begun. The seer's ominous words, heavy with the weight of prophecy, hung in the air of the great hall like a funeral shroud, casting a palpable pall over the vibrant, boisterous life of the Blackwood pack. A new weapon. An abomination. A perversion of nature. The vague, yet utterly terrifying pronouncement sent a ripple of deep, primal unease through the community, a low-grade, persistent hum of anxiety that was a stark, jarring contrast to the usual boisterous life. Affirming energy of the pack. Elias, the alpha, a pillar of calm, steady strength in the face of the encroaching storm, convened a council of his senior warriors, his handsome, weathered face a mask of grim, unwavering determination. Rhys and Clara were at his side, their hands clasped in a silent, unconscious gesture of solidarity, their bond a tangible, comforting presence in the tense, charged atmosphere of the room. The air in the great hall was thick with tension, the silence crackling with a volatile mixture of fear and a fierce, protective, and utterly primal anger. "Ilara's visions are never wrong," Elias said, his voice a low, resonant rumble that commanded the absolute, unwavering attention of everyone in the room. "The hunters are coming, and we must be ready." The pack's warriors, their faces a mixture of grim, stoic resolve and a fierce, unwavering loyalty that was as solid and as unyielding as the mountains that surrounded them, began to prepare for battle. Anya, the weapons master, her fiery red hair, a beacon of defiance in the dim light of the hall, oversaw the distribution of silver-laced blades and arrows, her voice a sharp, commanding bark as she drilled her warriors in defensive formations, her movements a blur of deadly, efficient grace. Ben, the healer, his gentle giant persona, a stark contrast to the grim reality of his task, stocked the infirmary with herbs and poultices, his large, capable hands moving with a practiced, life-saving efficiency. The entire pack mobilized, a well-oiled, perfectly synchronized machine, preparing for the fight of their lives. Clara, who had so recently been an outsider, a stranger, a human, was now at the very heart of the preparations. She was no longer just Reese's mate, a curiosity, a liability. She was a warrior of the Blackwood Pack, her unique and often surprising skills and her fierce, unwavering determination earning her a place of respect and even admiration among her new and fiercely protective family. She fought alongside Anya, her movements a graceful, deadly dance, her human intellect and her wolf's instincts combining to create a fighting style that was as unpredictable as it was effective. She learned from Ben her human knowledge of medicine and her new, preternaturally heightened senses, making her a surprisingly adept and intuitive healer's assistant. She was a bridge between two worlds, a symbol of the very thing the hunters so despised and so feared. But as she prepared for the coming battle, a new, nagging, and increasingly urgent question began to surface in her mind. The robe wolf, the one who had saved her as a child, the one who had been watching over her, protecting her from the shadows for her entire life. Who was he? And why, after all these years, had he chosen to protect her? She sought out Elara, the seer, hoping that the old she-wolf's visions, as cryptic and as frustrating as they often were, could shed some light on the mystery that lay at the very heart of her existence. She found her in her small, herb-scented cabin, her clouded, ancient eyes gazing into the flickering, dancing flames of a fire. "You wish to know about the rogue," Elara said, her voice a low, raspy, and all-knowing whisper. It wasn't a question, but a statement of fact. "Yes," Clara said, her voice barely a whisper, a soft, hesitant sound in the quiet, sacred space. "Who is he?" Elara sighed, a long, weary, and soul-deep sound that seemed to come from the very depths of her ancient, weary soul. "His name is Kale," she said, her voice heavy with a profound, heart-wrenching sadness. "And he was once one of us. He was the alpha of a neighboring pack, the Silver Creek Pack, a good and noble leader, a true alpha in every sense of the word, but he was betrayed by his own brother." The story that Elara told was a tragic, heartbreaking tale of jealousy, ambition, and the ultimate, unforgivable betrayal. Kale's brother, consumed by a lust for power and a deep, festering resentment of his older, more powerful sibling, had made a deal with the devil, with the Argentum Order. He had sold out his own pack, his own kin, his own blood, in exchange for a position of power within the Hunters' Society. Kale, heartbroken, alone, and hunted by his own kind, had been forced to flee, his pack scattered to the winds, his life, his world, shattered into a million irreparable pieces. He had become a rogue, a wanderer, a ghost in the shadows of the werewolf world, his heart a frozen, barren wasteland of grief and despair. "He saw in you a kindred spirit," Alara explained, her clouded ancient eyes gazing at Clara with a new, profound, and heart-wrenching understanding. "A fellow survivor, an innocent caught in the crossfire of a war she did not choose, a war she did not even know existed. He has been your silent guardian, your protector, your unseen, unknown angel, for your entire life." The revelation was a new, emotional blow, another layer of complexity, of tragedy, in the already tangled, chaotic web of her life. Kale. The name resonated within her, the faint, familiar, and now achingly poignant echo from a past she couldn't remember, from a life that had been stolen from her. He was not a monster. He was a hero. A fallen, broken hero. "Where is he now?" Clara asked, her voice thick with a mixture of sorrow, gratitude, and a dawning fierce resolve. "He is close," Alara said, her gaze once again fixed on the flickering, dancing flames. "He is drawn to the coming storm, to the scent of his own blood. He will not stand by and watch you fall. He will not let history repeat itself." The seer's words were a new, unexpected, and desperately needed ray of hope in the encroaching and seemingly impenetrable darkness. They were not alone. They had a powerful, unknown, and undoubtedly dangerous ally on their side. A few days later, the storm broke. The Argentum order arrived, not with a frontal, all-out assault, as they had expected, but with a subtle, insidious, and utterly terrifying infiltration. They came in the dead of night, their movements as silent as the falling snow that now dusted the ground, their presence a cold, menacing stain on the pristine, white landscape. They were a small, elite team, their faces hidden behind cold, impersonal silver masks, their eyes visible through the narrow slits, as cold and as merciless as a winter sky. And with them, they brought their new weapon. It was a creature of nightmare, a grotesque, horrifying perversion of their own kind. It was a werewolf, but it was also something else, something more and something less. Its body was a patchwork of flesh and metal, its eyes glowing with a malevolent, artificial, and utterly soulless light. It was a cyborg, a monstrous, unholy fusion of nature and machine, a living, breathing weapon of unimaginable and seemingly unstoppable power. The battle that ensued was a brutal, bloody, and utterly chaotic affair. The cyborg was a force of nature, a whirlwind of destruction, its metallic claws tearing through flesh and bone with a sickening, effortless ease. It was faster, stronger, and more relentless than any werewolf they had ever faced. The Blackwood warriors fought bravely, their courage and their loyalty unwavering, their bodies a living, breathing shield, protecting their home, their families, their way of life, but they were outmatched. Clara fought with a ferocity that surprised even herself. She was a whirlwind of motion, her silver-laced dagger a blur in her hand, her movements a graceful, deadly dance of predator and prey. She fought alongside Reese, their movements a synchronized, deadly symphony of violence, their bond a source of seemingly endless and often surprising strength. They were a formidable team, their love a weapon, as potent and as deadly as any blade. But even together, they were no match for the cyborg. The creature was a relentless, unstoppable, and utterly soulless killing machine. It cornered Elias, the Alpha, his body battered and bleeding, his strength failing, its metallic claws extended, its glowing red eyes fixed on him with a cold, merciless, and utterly inhuman intent. Reese, with a roar of pure, unadulterated, and utterly primal fury, threw himself in front of his Alpha, shielding him with his own body, a selfless and ultimately foolish act of loyalty and love. The cyborg's claws sank into Reese's shoulder, the sound of tearing flesh and grinding bone, a sickening, horrifying, and unforgettable sound. Reese cried out in agony, a raw, guttural sound of pure, unadulterated pain, his body convulsing as a wave of black, viscous, and undoubtedly deadly poison, a hellish concoction of wolfsbane and silver nitrate, coursed through his veins. Clara screamed, a raw, guttural, and utterly heartbroken sound of pure, unadulterated anguish. Her mate, her Reese, he was dying. And in that moment, something within her, something ancient, something powerful, something that had been lying dormant for her entire life, snapped. The fear, the confusion, the grief, the rage, it all coalesced into a single, white-hot, and utterly incandescent point of pure, unadulterated, and utterly righteous rage. A power, ancient and primal. A power she had never known she possessed, surged through her, a tidal wave of raw, untamed, and utterly terrifying energy. Her eyes, which had been a beautiful, luminous golden colour, now blazed with a brilliant, blinding silver light. A low, guttural growl, a sound of pure, untamed, and utterly primal fury tore from her throat. She was no longer Clara, the human. She was no longer Clara, the werewolf. She was something more, something ancient, something powerful. She was a queen. She lunged at the cyborg, her movements a blur of speed and power that was beyond human, beyond werewolf, beyond comprehension. She was a force of nature, a tempest of righteous, avenging fury. The cyborg, which had been an unstoppable, relentless killing machine, was suddenly, inexplicably, on the defensive, its metallic body, its advanced weaponry, no match for the raw, primal, and utterly terrifying power. That was radiating from her. The Argentum Order hunters, their faces, hidden behind their cold, impersonal silver masks, a mask of shock and disbelief, tried to intervene, to save their precious and undoubtedly expensive weapon. But they were too late. Clara was a whirlwind of destruction, her rage a palpable, physical force that sent them flying, their silver masks and their fancy, high-tech weapons no match for the ancient, primal magic that was coursing through her veins. She tore the cyborg apart, her bare hands ripping through its metallic shell with an ease that defied logic, her teeth sinking into its synthetic and surprisingly yielding flesh. She was a creature of vengeance, a goddess of retribution, her grief and her rage fueling her with a strength that was beyond comprehension, beyond imagination. When the dust settled, the cyborg was a pile of twisted, sparking metal and smouldering blackened wires. Its glowing red eyes, once so menacing, now dark and lifeless. The Argentan Order hunters, their prize weapon destroyed, their mission a catastrophic and humiliating failure, retreated into the darkness. Their faces, what she could see of them, a mask of fear and a dawning, horrified, respect. Clara, her body trembling with the violent, uncontrollable aftershocks of the immense and terrifying power that had surged through her, collapsed to her knees, the brilliant silver light in her eyes slowly, reluctantly fading, replaced by the familiar golden glow. Her wolf's eyes. She crawled to Reese's side, her heart a shattered, bleeding, and utterly broken mess in her chest. He was pale, his breathing shallow, the black, viscous poison, a creeping, insidious death, still coursing through his veins. Ben, the healer, was at his side, his hands glowing with a soft, green, and ultimately futile light, as he tried to counteract the poison, but it was too strong, too potent, too deadly. "I can't stop it," Ben said, his voice thick with a mixture of frustration, despair, and a profound, heart-wrenching sorrow. "He's fading." Clara's world, which had just been saved by her own incredible and terrifying power, was about to be shattered once again. She was about to lose him, her mate, her other half, her reason for being. But then, a new figure emerged from the shadows, a silent, graceful, and utterly commanding presence. A tall, powerful wolf with silver-streaked fur and eyes the colour of a stormy sea. He was older, his handsome, weathered face etched with the lines of 1,000 sorrows, but his presence was one of quiet, confident, and unwavering power. It was Cale, the road, her guardian, her family. He knelt down beside Reese, his gaze, a mixture of sorrow and a strange, fierce pride, fixed on the dying wolf. "There is a way," he said, his voice a low, resonant rumble that seemed to vibrate through the very air around them. "But it is a dangerous path, a dark path, one that has not been walked in 1,000 years." He looked at Clara, his stormy grey eyes, so much like Reese's, filled with a mixture of sorrow, compassion, and a faint, flickering, and almost imperceptible hope. "The bond between you is strong," he said, his voice a low, reverent, and almost inaudible whisper. "Stronger than any I have ever seen. You have the power to save him, Clara. The power that you just unleashed. But it will require a sacrifice, a part of your own life force, a piece of your own soul." He was asking her to perform an ancient, forgotten, and incredibly dangerous ritual, a form of blood magic that could heal the incurable, that could, it was said, bring the dead back to life. But the cost, the price, was great. It would weaken her, perhaps permanently. It would leave her vulnerable, a shadow of her former, powerful self. But for Clara, there was no choice. A life without Reese was not a life at all. It was an eternity of darkness, of despair, of a cold, empty, and utterly meaningless existence. "Tell me what to do," she said, her voice clear and strong, all traces of fear and uncertainty gone, replaced by a fierce, unshakable, and utterly unwavering resolve. "I'll do it." Cale nodded, a faint, sad, and yet undeniably proud smile playing on his lips. "I knew you would," he said, his voice filled with a quiet, profound respect. "You are truly a queen." And as the first faint rays of dawn began to paint the eastern sky in breathtaking shades of rose and gold, Clara, with the help of the fallen hero who had been her silent, unseen guardian for her entire life, began the ancient, dangerous, and terrifying ritual that would either save her mate, her love, her very soul, or condemn them both to an eternity of darkness. The stakes had never been higher. The night had never been darker. And the fate of their world, of their love, hung precariously, terrifyingly, in the balance.